I'm a gamer here, bringing you more for the month of remembrance, or the days of remembrance. What days of remembrance? Remembrance. Alright, here's chapter 5 of Truce. Chapter 5. It was a sight one will never see again. On Christmas morning, the men awoke to something strange. Absolute quiet. When they glanced over the papers, they discovered a silent world, overed by a thick, clinging fog. English Lieutenant Edward Hussell noted that the silence seemed extremely extraordinary after the usual din. On all sides, birds seemed to cry, and would hardly ever see a bird. Generally, later in the day, I fed about 50 sparrows outside my throat, which shows you how complete the silent quiet was. English Sergeant Hilda Sith was a bit unnerved by the lack of familiar battle noise. It was so quiet it was uncanny. He wrote in his diary, "This were no place overhead, no observation balloons, no bombs, no rifle fire, therefore no snipers, just an optical lurk." Some men looked out on the strange scene and wondered if they had entered a dream world. Others preferred the peaceful atmosphere that continued as far beyond the life. Soldiers became aware of movement all around the enemy trenches. In one area of the battle line, German soldiers noted that a wooden board was being held up by British soldiers with the words "Merry Christmas" written on it. Several miles away, another board approached on the German side that read, "You no fight, we no fight." A German officer remembered that when the fog cleared, he saw a number of German soldiers doing exercises. They waved, he wrote, and our men waved back. After all, it was Christmas Day. A few minutes passed without anyone firing a shot, and then suddenly the Germans associated to us and our men were meddling in no man's land and other places where the men were more cautious. It took a while before trust won out. The British soldier with Spencer noted that there were no firing, so began sent gradually showing more of themselves, and two of the men came halfway and called for an offer. Spencer could speak German fluently, so he went out and found that they were willing to have an armistice for 4 hours. Then I arrived, and then can you imagine? Both sides came out, met in the middle, shook hands, wished each other compliments of the season, and held a chat. A strange sight between two hostile lines. There had been no official declaration of universal truce. In fact, commanders had gone out of their way to forbid any stopping of the fighting, and yet more such truce handed out were arranged that Christmas morning. All along the Western Front, truce were arranged by proposing a sign suggesting a ceasefire. Others came about throughout so that negotiations between lines or simply because soldiers wanted into no man's land and weren't shot. The truce were arranged so quickly that the high-ranking officers could do little to prevent them. Lieutenant Colonel Charles McLean was making this daily out of the trenches where he spotted some of his men clambering over the top and wandering towards the enemy. He ran along the trenches shouting for his men to return, but they ignored his instructions. When he kept on answering that they came back, his men pointed out that a number of enemies were out on their side and gazing peacefully across. The idea of a truce during war wasn't new or unusual. Truces had been called and fighting as far back as the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BC. During the American Civil War, numerous truces were arranged to bury the dead and to remove the wounded from the battlefields. Most such truces were approved by the officers for a limited amount of time and for very specific reasons. The Christmas truce in 1914, however, was unique. While some senior officers went out of their way to look the other way, most officers worked hard to put an end to it. The fact that the men under them defeated the others is extremely unusual. In addition, the truce lasted much longer and involved many more soldiers than any other previous truce. At the French village of New Hope on the river lays Captain C.I. Stockwell was shocked when 5 Germans began rolling a large barrel of beer across no man's land. A lot more Saxons then approached without arms. They were getting a bit thick. My men were getting a bit excited, and the Saxons kept shouting to them to come out. We did not like to fire as they were all unarmed, but we had strict orders and someone might have fired, so I climbed over the parapet and shouted for the opposing captain to appear. Neither captain spoke the other language, but the meeting that followed reigned peace. Each side agreed to refrain from shooting until the following day. Then the German captain gave the beer to Captain Stockwell and received a generous supply of plum pudding in exchange. While some regiments along the western front failed to take part, a stern number of men on both sides seemed to embrace the peace wonderfully. 10 times after agreeing to cease fire, Douglas Chiltern calculated that the ground beneath the 2 lines of trenches was swarming with men and officers of both sides, shaking hands and wishing each other a happy Christmas. After the inter-friendly meetings, the men realized there was a grim task to perform. Daylight and the walk into no man's land had allowed them to see the bodies of dead comrades still on the battlefield. In some sections of the front lines, only a few bodies were to be found, but in areas where the recent large-scale charges had taken place, there were often scores of dead to bury. It was haunting. English Captain Jules Loder wrote in the war diary to some of his chaps one knew so well and who had started out in such good spirits, lying there dead. Soldiers then began the sad job of locating dead comrades and carrying them back to their side of the battle line. While this was being done, other soldiers dug graves out of the now frozen earth, and the dead were buried. Following the burials, the men on both sides usually held separate prayer services for their fallen comrades. The 19-year-old British Lieutenant Arthur Brown described most Wolverine joint prayer service he prepared in for 100 dead British German soldiers. Our parade arranged the prayers, devotion, etc., and an expert broke then out in German. They read first in English by Fear and then in German by a German boy who was studying for the ministry. It was extraordinary and most wonderful sight. The Germans formed up one side, the English on the other, the officer standing in front, every head bared. Yes, I think it was a sight one will never see again. Once the burials and services were finished, the soldiers mingled in the blasted area between the lines. Small gifts were presented to the enemy, such as jam, cigars, cigarettes, chocolate, coffee, sausages, nuts, tea, and newspapers. Many soldiers exchanged souvenirs, including original badges and buttons cut off their uniforms. One of the most highly prized items was a critical the spiked helmet. This was still used by the German army early in the war, and once but a pair of ravens suddenly began rushing across no man's land, and the men took off after them. The British private found it laughable to see the Germans and ourselves gathering skirting after the Christmas dinner, which scripted the original history of one English company recorded that a pig was killed, then cooked, in no man's land, shared with the butch, and many strange and unusual things were observed that day. Butch Burnsfield was amazed when he saw one of my machine gunners cutting the unusually long hair of a Durgo birch who was currently kneeling on the ground while the automatic clippers crept up the back of his neck. While scenes like this were being played out in many locations, there were no other areas where the fighting went on as always. In most cases it was the Germans who made the suggestion for a day of peace, only to be rejected. An English major was in no mood, but on this one at daybreak a few Germans put their hands up and shouted Merry Christmas. Other men after yesterday were not feeling that way and shot at them. They at once rebelled, and a sniping match went on all day. Several miles away, Captain Billy Crew noted in the diary, "We have issued orders to the men not on any account to allow a truce, as we have heard that they were probably trying to. The Germans did try. They came over towards us saying so we opened rapid fire on them, which is the only truce they deserve. While it usually the Allies who refused to have a truce, there were few places where the Germans were and the ones who wanted to continue the fighting. The German lieutenant sent a formal reference to a British truce offer that said in part, "Gentlemen, you asked us yesterday temporarily to suspend hostilities and to become friends during Christmas. Such a proposal in the past would have been accomplished with pleasure, but at the present time we have clearly recognized England's real character. We refuse to make any such arrangements. And of course, individuals and German units often boycotted the truce. One of the most famous was a young corporal of the infamous regiment that was marched to form the front lines. While this comrades heard about the truce, they struggled marching forward to the celebration. Corporal Adolf Hitler formally refused to take part, urging that such a thing should never happen in wartime. Have you no German sense of honor left at all? In the end, however, it was ordered that one of the days as hundreds of thousands of soldiers simply dedicated to their saying that they're going to fight. A surprise corporal the Germans are fed up with the war and will not fire unless British soldiers do. They admit they had been baffled by the Kaiser. One fellow who was a teacher in England, when asked what he thought of the war, said the war is finished here. We don't want to shoot. A British private was startled when they greeted a German in no man's land. The first time I came to was an old man, and we got shook hands. I thought he was not going to let my hand go. The tears came rolling down his cheeks, and I felt sorry for him as he was so old and wanted to go home. As night approached, many of the men began drifting back to their trenches. Altogether, we had a great day with our enemies. British Private P.J. Jones wrote in his diary, and portrayed with much handbreadth and mutual goodwill and section, the men arranged to have another truce on New Year's Day. Eventually, a number of photographs had been taken that day. The Germans wanted to return to see how they came out. There was a realization on both sides that something truly extraordinary had taken place. A German soldier wrote home that it was a Christmas celebration in keeping with the command, peace on earth, and a memory which will stay with us always. The view was echoed by a British soldier. The experience had been the most practical demonstration I have seen of peace on earth and goodwill towards men. British Surgeon Alfred Love returned to his dugout to record his thoughts. Even as I write, I can scarcely credit it that I have seen and done this integrated with wonderful day as darkness once again enrolled the quiet battlefield. The armies settled in for a night's rest. British Captain R.J. Arms formed and drifted to sleep. He wandered along the trench, thinking about what he had just experienced. I felt our friends, the Germans, on Christmas Day, a quiet mood. I stood upon the parapet and had a final look around, and not a shot was fired. Well, this is Common Gamer here. Please go up to a veteran and say thank you for what they did. The Christmas truce lasted the other 3 years, and the last Christmas truce was 1917, as the war ended in 1918, on November 11th. But please go to a veteran, say thank you to them. If you see a veteran out in the streets that's hungry, give them a meal, and try to give them a job. This is all from me for right now. This is Common Gamer signing off. Please comment, rate, subscribe, and hit the like button.